welcome to everybody, and we're so glad you could join us today. This is exciting, and we're really happy to have Myles Himmelreich join us from lovely British Columbia. Is it sunny there, Myles, or rainy?
No, it's been pretty cloudy and windy here, so
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we're in a cold spell in Saskatchewan, so currently this morning it was like 1 degree, so winter is coming. We know it's around the corner.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm assuming that most of our guests are from Saskatchewan, but there may be some people from other places as well. So welcome everybody. I'm also letting you know that we are going to record this webinar. The Saskatchewan Prevention Institute is a nonprofit organization, and our goal is healthy children. So we work to prevent disabilities in children. And part of that work is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder prevention. If you're ready, Marlene, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to talk about FASD. Let's change the conversation. What our plan is for the day is that we plan to share a lot of information with you, and what we're hoping is that during the presentation you can put any questions you may have in the chat box. I believe the chat box should be available. If you're not sure how to find it, I think you can find it on your Bev, are you better explaining this? Bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
Yes, and we find that'll be easier than if we have people coming in with questions. Even though they may be burning questions, it might be easier for us just to answer some of those questions at a little bit different time. I save them for the end. So Bev gave a brief introduction to the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. And I am Marlene Dray. I am one of the FASD prevention coordinators at the Prevention Institute. I have been here for 9 years and have loved every minute of it. My background is in with people with cognitive disabilities, and it's really nice to be working on this end and learning more about prevention and support. Bev,
Yes.
I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Bev Drew, and I've been with the Institute about 13 years. And besides fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, the other thing that I do for the Institute is teach motivational interviewing training to service providers. So if you're ever interested in exploring that, you can get in touch with me. And I will be hosting some online trainings very shortly that I'll be publicizing. So keep an eye out for that. And Myles, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Myles Himmelreich. I'm a disabilities consultant, and I've been working in the field of FASD for about 15 years or so. Spending a lot of time running mentoring groups and self-advocating groups. And I myself have FASD, and so a lot of the work I do is shared from my own personal experiences, and then connecting, supporting, and empowering other individuals with FASD is kind of what my goal and my work is all about. Thank you.
Thanks, Myles. And before we get started as well, I just want to acknowledge that we are broadcasting this webinar from Treaty 6 territory and the home of the Métis people, the traditional homeland of the Métis people. Most of the information from this webinar comes from information from Canada FASD Research Network. There's the CanFast Media Kit, Common Messages, and there is a Manitoba Language Guide. We will share those documents with you by email after the webinar is over. So we are encouraging people to think about changing the language, but on occasion we may be talking about a couple of things that could be triggers for some people. So if you do feel a little bit triggered, please make sure to take care of yourself and find someone trusted that you can talk to and start to feel better. We want to change the conversation because we also want to have constant, consistent, evidence-based conversations, evidence-based language about FASD. We want to promote dignity. We want to promote understanding. We want to get rid of the stigma that is around FASD. We want people with FASD, and we want their families to feel accepted, and to be able to access services and to talk about FASD without fear of finger pointing or stigma. So in the webinar, we're introducing some of the newer words, some of the newer vocabulary that is now appearing in our field of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And we just wanted to introduce them to you so you can be part of changing the conversation. All right, Bev.
Thank you. Can I just ask everyone to take a look at your screens? In the bottom left corner, there's a mute button that looks like a microphone. Make sure you're muted because we do hear a little bit of background noise. And thank you for that. Current studies show that about 4% of Canadians have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So it's substantial. That's a lot of people. And so it's not something that just affects a very small number of people. That's very large. And we know that what we know, we know that what we say and how we say it can make a real difference. It makes a difference in how people feel about FASD. It makes a difference in how people react to an individual who has FASD. How people feel about themselves. And Myles, I'll ask you to jump in a bit, but you know, in terms of yourself as an individual, but also your mother. How did your mother feel when people stigmatized her or thought she was a bad mother because she drank? We know that how we say things can make a difference to women asking for help. If women feel judged and stigmatized, they're less likely to ask for help and support. So that is the real difference that can happen. So Myles, what's your feeling about how we say things?
I think that one of the things that I always think is important when we're talking about changing the conversation and we're looking at different advertisements and things in regards to sharing information about FASD, I think we need to look at how would the birth mother feel if she saw that advertisement? How would an individual with FASD feel if they saw that advertisement? I think over the years we've had a lot of great campaigns and well-meaning people doing well-meaning work, but sometimes the language that's been used can be could be offensive, it could be hurtful to an individual or to a birth mom. And so when we go through some of the stuff today, thinking about that perspective of this is how I see it, but how could someone else see it, right? And how could someone else read it, right? And so I think when we see some of the campaigns like, don't harm your child and be selfish, right? It's like, so you're saying to my mom that she's being selfish, which you don't know my mom, you don't know the circumstance, everything that's going on. So why are we judging and why are we doing that? Because then we're stuck, right? We're not moving forward. We get stuck on the same conversations over and over. So that's why we need to look at the wording that we're doing, look at the advertising, and think about how it affects everybody, whether it's the birth mom, society, or the individual. And so then we can start to change the conversation and then make an actual difference moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Myles. Yeah, I think good intentions are great, but good intentions with the right language and the right approach and respect and compassion make a bigger difference in terms of service and support. So that's really helpful. And we do know that every person is unique. Every child is unique. Every person with FASD is unique. Every mom is unique in her situation. So that's, and what we know about all those people and all those unique individuals is they all deserve to be respected. They all deserve our compassion and our support, no matter the circumstance. So, and I think that's where language comes into play. Thank you, Myles. Marlene.
All right. So what is FASD? Well, what I'm going to share with you is the definition from the FASD Research Network. So FASD, or Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, is a diagnostic term that is used to describe the impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. FASD is a lifelong disability. Individuals with FASD will experience some degree of challenges in their daily living and need support. And need support with motor skills, physical health, learning, memory, attention, communication, emotional regulation, and social skills to reach their full potential. Each individual with FASD is unique and has areas of both strength and challenges. So that is one of the two definitions that FASD has created for FASD. And we'll talk a little bit more about diagnosis, but we're still in today's in Canada, still using terms like fetal alcohol syndrome, partial fetal alcohol syndrome, prenatal fetal alcohol effects, alcohol-related birth defects, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorders. But now we talk in terms of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. It is a spectrum, which is broad. And to note too, it talks in this definition, brain and body. A lot of us think in terms of it's the brain that is impacted, and yes, it can be impacted throughout all 9 months of pregnancy, and alcohol can impact actually a developing brain until the mid-20s once it finishes fully developing. But it's also a body, a disability of the body, and Myles can talk a little bit more about that. But I just want you to keep that in mind, brain and body definition. It's not a disease. People do not suffer from FASD. And Myles, you may have a comment on that one.
So yeah, when we're talking about the diagnosis, it's changed so much over the years. And, you know, even in the States, they still use the terminology that we used a couple of years back, which was FASD, the umbrella term, right? And so when we were changing the diagnosis, at that time I was doing a mentoring group, and I'd asked some of the individuals there, I said, what do you think about the diagnosis changing? And kind of the feedback we got was, stop changing it, because we need to know what we have, right? It's important for us to know, so when we're going into the doctor and they say, you know, is there anything else that we need to know? And we can say, yes, I have FASD. And not have to say the umbrella term, or FAE, or FAS, or partial, or I don't know what it is this week, but I have it, right? So it's important to understand that when we talk about the diagnosis, that we have to find a way to be on the same page about it, right? And I think that alone has its own stigma when we talk about people want to change the actual diagnosis and take out the words fetal and alcohol. And make it more about environmental-based things. I can share from my own personal experience that my attachment disorder could have been affected due to my environmental effects, but my sensory issues and my processing speed and my memory was caused from the alcohol intake during pregnancy. So those are two different things. So we need to understand that, you know, for the individuals I've spoken with, kind of it's like, we're okay with it, let's move on, right? So that's what other people need to understand, is being okay with that and understanding that it affects the brain and the whole body. It's called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Let's continue moving forward, right? So that we're not stuck simply on what the wording is, because there'll always be words and people will always turn them into negatives eventually, given the right amount of time and the right circumstances, right? So.
And thanks, Myles. And as we talk a little bit more about language, what I was thinking I would do was just read or share with you 2 or 3 statements that I found on the internet, and I just want to get people's reactions. And so the question I have here is, what do you think, or how do you feel when you have somebody talking about people with FASD can have abnormal facial features or abnormal physical features and deformed limbs? So If you can, just go into the poll and you should be able to just click on which answer works best. And don't know, is it good, neutral, bad, or don't know?
And there's a submit button at the bottom.
Thank you, Bev.
Are these all private, the responses?
They're private.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't know who's putting in the response. I made sure to make that anonymous because this is a learning webinar, so not everybody knows all the information or you wouldn't be here. Okay, I think I'm going to close the poll. So Myles, I'm going to ask you, what's your reaction when you hear words like that?
It's not pleasant. It's and I mean that's the thing about a lot of the advertisements and campaigns out there is that things aren't always done in a positive way, right? So, but that kind of wording, such as deformed limbs, abnormal, those kind of things really push the fact that you're different. You're not like everybody else. And they push it in towards of a negative direction, right? So when hearing that, it's certainly not something that I want to go and advertise. Oh, I have FASD. I'm like that. I'm abnormal, and I have different kind of limbs, and all of those things, right? So I think that's a good example of how, say, a doctor or someone working at a diagnostic clinic would look at that and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We should put that out there, right? But then from a perspective of an individual who reads that, that's not necessarily going to be the conversation starter that you're going to have with somebody while you're sitting at a restaurant and you see that poster, right? You're not going to be like, hey, that's me, right? So.
Thanks, Myles. I have another poll, another set of comments. FASD is 100% preventable if the mother does not drink alcohol during pregnancy. And similarly is also 100% permanent. The damage done by the alcohol cannot be undone or cured. Looking for reactions to that statement. Good, neutral, bad, don't know. And then I'll ask Myles.
Well, I'll share a little bit while people are doing up the surveys.
Good,
So and again, this was a very popular campaign that was done saying FASD is 100% preventable. And this is a great example of well-meaning people trying to make a positive change, right? Saying that, well, if you don't take alcohol, then your child won't have FASD. So that's where we want to get to, is that we have no children with FASD. So if we put the simple statement that don't drink, won't have FASD, makes sense, right? So it's 100% preventable. But this is the example of where if you look at this from the stance of a birth mother, I'll just speak upon my own mom. For her to see something like that, she could have thought, so if you didn't drink, your son wouldn't have struggled in school. If you didn't drink, your son would have been homeless and had addiction issues and, all of these things that I had to face and struggled with, I wouldn't have had them if my mom didn't drink, and if you just chose not to drink, it would have saved everything, right? And that's why we need to understand about the impacts of alcohol. Understanding that as a society, we need to know that, we don't know all the impacts at all the times during a pregnancy, right? So, but also too, the bigger picture is understanding you don't know you're pregnant sometimes for 3-6 months or more. And if you're a social drinker, your child still can have FASD. It's not that image that we have of the lady who is a drunken alcoholic on a big bender kind of thing. It's simply, it could be anybody, right? So understanding that judging somebody by going, it's 100% preventable, you could have made this not happen, is not good, because my mom has enough shame and blame that she puts on herself. They don't need somebody, else in the community doing that, right? So that's why we need to move away from that statement. And that was a statement that was used for quite a while. And again, very well-meaning, but cause some damage more than support.
Thanks, Myles. Beth.
Yes. This is a simpler definition. So it's a lifelong disability. It affects both the brain and the body of people exposed to alcohol in the womb. And each person with FASD has both strengths and challenges. And we can use those strengths to really support that person and help build them up and help create more strengths. And we can put in supports to help deal with their challenges, to really help them succeed in life. And I know, Myles, you've often talked about, your strengths and that you are successful in life. And I remember early on when we were getting to know each other, I thought that, this is a young man who has this disability, and yet you are so capable and so tuned into people's feelings. You have a lot of empathy, and you're just so talented in so many ways. You can be smiling here, and lots of people would think, oh, I'm going to meet this guy with this disability, and have an image that is negative in their mind. But all you have to do is get to know you and understand that you have so many strengths. So I wonder if you'd like to respond in any way to that.
So thank you very much for those
You're
kind
welcome.
words. I think that is actually shows very well about wanting to show the things I can do rather than things I can't do. And we're all like that. Doesn't matter if you have a disability or not, we want to put out the things we can do rather than what we can't. So when we're talking about campaigns and being able to connect with them, to be able to have campaigns out there that if I see it, I can feel comfortable enough to go, oh, actually I have FASD, right? And not feel ashamed, because we already, go through years of feeling ashamed and focusing on the things we can't do, right? We need to focus on the things we can do to bring in those supports so people around me know what they need to do different, not me necessarily. In some cases, yes, but I need the people around me to do things differently. And I need to focus on the things I can do rather than the things that I can't do. And when we're talking about strengths, one of the things that we need to remember is a lot of times people list strengths and they'll go, oh, he's good at coloring. He gives really good hugs, those kind of things. And I was sharing with Marlene the other day that I was thinking about a month or so ago back about, it's interesting when people put those kind of things down as strengths. You wouldn't put that down as a strength when you're going in for a job interview, right? I'm a human being. I'm not a Care Bear, so he's good at smiling and hugs and, so just understanding that I need those acknowledgements of what my actual strengths are so I know what to focus on. So.
Something meaningful, right? That
Yes.
Absolutely.
Specific, meaningful strength that can really. Yeah. Thank you, Marlene. I'll pass it to you.
All right. So briefly mention diagnosis, that a lot of the other terms that have been used in the past are no longer being used. In Canada, the new guidelines for diagnosis from about 2015 are FASD without sentinel facial features, FASD with sentinel facial features, and then there is a term called at risk for neurodevelopmental disorder and FASD. So FASD without sentinel features means that a person, when they have done the assessment with a team of doctors and social workers and other specialists and the family and the school, they have a confirmation of pregnancy, and the individual has been kind of below typical in 3 out of 10 brain type of categories that they take a look at. The reason I put without sentinel facial features first is that when it comes to FASD and fetal alcohol syndrome, so many people think in terms of a person has to have a very typical a distinct look to have an FASD. They have to have eyes that appear to be wide apart. They have a no philtrum, like it's thin or flat. That's these little grooves between the nose and the mouth, and a very thin upper lip. And then there are some other things too, but there are 3 distinctive features that can go with the sentinel facial features. But there's only a very small time period in pregnancy that the facial features can be impacted. So really only about 5 to 10% of people with an FASD have distinctive facial features. So that means there are 90% of people who are living with a brain and body disorder that a lot of people aren't recognizing because they don't have a distinctive facial look. So I really encourage people to think in terms of without sentinel facial features. People look like everybody else. What's going on inside is what we may not see. We may not see the aches and pains and the bones and stuff, but there is something going on.
Marlene, can I butt in just for
Yeah.
a moment? I'm just our timekeeper, and we're almost at the half hour.
Okay.
So we might just need to speed
We
up.
will. So what I'll just say is there's a term that's given for people, usually young children, maybe 6, 7 and under, who are brought in for a diagnosis. They don't necessarily meet all the criteria, but people think there is something going on there. So they could get the term at risk for neurodevelopmental disorder and FASD, and it's encouraged they come back later for another assessment. Prevention, Bev.
Okay. So when we talk about FASD prevention, Myles, you've said this to me before, and to Marlene, are you trying to prevent me? Mm-hmm. We're not trying to prevent people like Myles, because the world would be, missing this amazing person. What we're really trying to do is talk about how do we prevent or reduce prenatal alcohol exposure to fetuses, and then perhaps reduce the impacts that they may experience in their lives. So that's what prevention is all about. And Myles, we certainly don't want to prevent you. So we know FASD is caused by exposure to alcohol. So if we can reduce that in any way, that both mom and baby and family will perhaps not have those bumps along the way and have a different outcome in life. So that's what we're trying to do. We also recognize that those positive messages that we state about hope are really important, right? It's never too late to stop. So a woman who's already been drinking in pregnancy, making a statement like that gives her a little bit of hope that, oh yeah, okay, I can still make a difference. We also recognize that it's not just up to the woman. It's not just up to the mother. She has a family and community that can also be involved in that prevention and in supporting her to avoid alcohol during pregnancy. Is there anything you'd add, Myles, to prevention?
No, I just kind of echoing what you're saying there in regards to when you see a campaign that says prevent FASD, and I've seen ones where it says we want to, work our way to where we no longer have FASD in our communities. And, again, taking it from a perspective of an individual, I could read that as you want a community and society where people like me aren't around. And then I read it as, well, then what's wrong with me, right? So I think that's a great example of looking at these campaigns and these advertisements and saying, okay, sounds good, but what if someone else was reading it from a different view? So, yeah.
So it's a very, very thought-provoking idea, right? How do we say it? And what Thank you, Myles. I'll pass it to you, Marlene.
Okay, thank you. So when we're talking about FASD, a lot of times my experience has been that we talk about, okay, and I mean, we've already done it really, like, there are brain and body challenges, brain and body impacts. Person may have trouble functioning socially, may have trouble making friends. There are so many things that we talk about that are really the deficits, the negative side of FASD. And when all you hear is the negative, it can become quite easy to not see that there can be positive. People with FASD are amazing people. They may have challenges, but they also experience exciting opportunities, and they provide us with opportunities to work with them and to expand ourselves and make ourselves better people too. I've learned a lot from Myles, and I've learned a lot from other people with FASD, because they just have so much to share and to teach me if I just stop to listen. And I think that's something that's really important for us to do. So what we're encouraging people to think about is we have to acknowledge what the impacts are so that we can be there and provide the right kind of environment and be the most supportive and set everybody up for success. But we have to also acknowledge the strengths of people with FASD, because there are many, many strengths beyond giving good hugs and coloring Myles, right?
Yes.
So have realistic expectations, but take a look at what else the person brings to the table or the family brings to the table. So Myles, would you like to expand on that?
I think you covered pretty much everything that I would say. So yeah,
Okay.
I think we're good to move forward.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm moving eventually. There we go.
There we go. Maybe Myles, if I can, I'll let you speak to this in terms of putting people first before their label.
So when it comes to FASD, what we try to do is, of course, be strength-based, but also person first. So when we're talking about an individual with FASD, we would say Johnny who has FASD, not that FASD kid, or FASD Johnny, whatever, right? Now the complicated thing about that is when we look at the other disabilities such as autism in their field, the individuals there may want to be called, have their disability acknowledged first, right? But when it comes to FASD, we try to do person first. And so, because we're focusing on who the person is, not what the disability is, right? So one of the really good things is the Manitoba Language Guide. And Marlene said she'll be sending those out. Those have a great examples, and I quite often will refer to those when trying to figure out how do you correctly say this, what's the best way to word it, and it gives really good examples of what people say, what people should say, and why, right? So I think that's something that you definitely will want to take a look at when you get those, is the Manitoba Language Guide, because it gives those exact examples, right? Instead of suffers with, instead of a victim of, right? You would say an individual with. Even instead of saying things like lives with FASD, the way that I remember that is a friend told me once, if you say you live with FASD, does your FASD pay half your rent? Does it buy some of the groceries? If you live with it, right? So I think that's a great thing to be able to take advantage of and look at, is the language guide.
Thank you, Myles. We can also think about those words when we're talking about moms who are drinking during pregnancy. Not calling her an addict, but a mother who is using alcohol. That's the secondary piece to her other role. She's a person first. Yeah. So those labels can just hurt and be painful, and I think it takes some time to really, it takes nothing to say them, and yet they can have a huge impact. So as you said, Myles. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to you, Marlene.
All right. What we have here is a chart that we've adapted from Diane Melvin, and it started off being behavior. Now this one here is related to children, and it has been used in kind of many circumstances. But what has happened here is that we've kind of taken it from what the behavior is. Okay, it makes the same mistakes over and over again. And if we are thinking that a child or a person won't do it, we're thinking in terms of willful and manipulative, not trying. Diane Malbit encouraged us to think in terms of can't, so that then we start to think, okay, this child is not able to link, what I did by, I don't know, hugging too tightly or something, to what happened, which was, the child didn't want to hang around with the one who hugged too tightly. So they can't link cause to effect, or they're manipulative. Now we assume they're manipulative. Oops, that shouldn't even be there. Ignore that manipulative sign. Marlene has a typo. I will wipe it out on the PowerPoint that I share with you. But if we think they can't, we start to think they can't link cause to effect. But if we start to look at it even differently, if we think the person can, but differently, then we start to see it differently. Can, maybe with visual cues and positive prompts. So when we start to think about how we can start to make the difference, how we can make some assistance and setting the child up or the person up for success, with us doing our part to make sure the person's set up for success. So it still kind of moves away from all of the expectations that can come with when we're working on helping somebody change some of their behaviors, but it also shows that we're a big part of being part of the success, setting somebody up well. And the question I had thought I could just have people think about, don't need to be writing down answers, but if you happen to see a child or a person who is maybe making the same mistakes over and over again, even if you don't have a diagnosis of FASD, like what if you don't know if the person has an FASD? If you think in terms of won't, then you're still making an assumption about that person. But if you start thinking like, what might be going on in this person's brain and body, and even if it's not FASD, it could be still that there's something else going on with the person, some other maybe kind of challenge that the person's living with. Then if we start to think in terms of can't, we start to move away from some of that almost like punitive type of thinking, which is not a good way for us to be working with children and adults. And if we start to think can but differently, we're just setting our whole mind frame up differently. And I think it's much more positive than just can't, won't, willful. Myles.
Yeah, I agree. Again, it is changing that direction of the conversation from can't and won't to how can we think about it differently, because can't and won't doesn't give us any solutions or the opportunity for change, right? So, if we think about, okay, maybe they can if we change the environment, or we change the supports, or we explain what the possible outcomes could be in a different way, right? Instead of going, well, they just can't learn, they'll never understand, right? So, yeah.
Would it have made a difference for you, Myles, when you were, say, in school or out in the workplace or whichever, if people had been looking at what was, you may have been experiencing differently?
Yeah, I think so. I think that trying to see what was going on, and especially when we see the same behaviors over and over again, and going, when are they going to change? When are they going to learn, right? And it's like, well, what could you do to help me change and learn differently, right? And part of that change in the conversation is having the conversation with the individuals. So asking me what's going to work, what's not going to work, those kind of things, because I may know something that you don't, because I'm experiencing these things every day, all day long, right? So if we're going to change the conversation, I need to be a part of that change, right? So.
And even young children can come up with some solutions and ideas. They know themselves really well. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, they might be able to explain to you, it's not that I'm not listening and I don't care, it's those lights are bugging me, or the tags on my clothes are bugging me. So give them the opportunity to be part of that conversation so that we can all change it.
Yes. Okay. And we know that people with FASD are born with some difficulties, some things that are challenging. And we also know that through the interaction of their disability plus their environment, sometimes outcomes can be also a struggle. They weren't necessarily born with it, but it comes along in part of their life as a struggle because of the interaction of what they're born with and what they're experiencing. So things like living in poverty, being in and out of the foster system. There's so many things, right? Malnutrition, getting in trouble with the law, like so many things that can go wrong. And they can go wrong for anybody, not necessarily a person with FASD. But when you combine the two, sometimes it's a bit of a double whammy. So we certainly understand about that. So Myles, I wondered if you would talk about some of the pieces that you're aware of. I know you've done a lot of work around the justice system, for example, and mental health stuff. Would you mind sharing some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when it comes to mental health and justice and things like that, we can't change the conversation if we're not having the conversation first. And I think a lot of times when it comes to those kind of things, the conversation isn't there. Talking about how's FASD playing a role in this situation? How's it playing a role in, that individual that is coming in and out of the justice system time and time again? Maybe they're not understanding the cause and effect. Maybe they're having memory issues. Whatever it is, we need to look at it and say, okay, so this individual has FASD. How's this playing a role for them in this certain situation? Same thing with mental health. All of these things we need to look at from the lens of, okay, what else could be happening due to their FASD, right? And so once we have that conversation, sometimes we'll be able to find the answer and go, oh my goodness, well, of course he's not going to learn if nobody's teaching him differently that what concrete and abstract thinking is, ownership, those kind of things, instead of just going, he always steals things, right? Understanding that we need to talk about FASD so that we can better understand it, so we can make those changes, right?
Yeah. And we do know that the earlier those supports are put in place, the better off, the better chances that person has of having success. So if you can, start putting in supports for children in the preschool years, chances are they're going to have more success when they get to elementary school and not have as many struggles. So
yeah, and having those conversations at the younger age allows the individual to feel, oh, I can actually talk about and share what is difficult for me or what doesn't work, right? Instead of waiting until they're 22 and they're in the justice system and they're not going to be heard, right?
It's kind of too late in that sense, right? Like you missed an opportunity to prevent some adverse outcome from happening. So, yeah. Marlene.
All right. Just before we leave this slide, I'm just going to say that adverse outcomes is one of the new terms that's being used. So many people have heard the term secondary disability, and these really aren't necessarily disabilities. These are impacts of the primary impacts that happen with prenatal alcohol exposure. So I just wanted to put that in, that when people talk secondary disabilities, that's no longer, it's recommended not to use that term because these are outcomes.
Yeah, being homeless isn't a disability. It's just a consequence of struggling with not being able to pay rent.
Yeah,
various things. So
exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Marlene.
You are welcome. This isn't exactly, this is a visual changing of the conversation. Just wanted to let you know that the images that we use in a lot of our campaigns can really make a difference as well for the message that we are sending. So when it's recommended that you not show a woman just from her neck down to show the the pregnant belly. Like, a woman is an entire being, not just a carrier of a baby. And when we're talking FASD prevention, I think we also should be talking about making sure that the mother is whole and as healthy as possible, not just that concentration on it's only the impact on the baby that we care about, We need to think of the whole person. So it's really better not to use, from the neck down. People being successful living with FASD. Oh, I just said living with FASD, or Myles, whoever you are. I'm going to be turfed from the webinar. I guess I'm living proof that sometimes it's not as easy to always get our language changed. We still will have slip-ups. You forgive me?
Oh, you're muted, Myles.
I do, yes.
Yes, he nodded his head, so I'm okay.
The good
So,
thing, Marlene, is that you caught it, and we can all do that, right? If we make a slip, you can say, oh, geez, I shouldn't have said it that way. Let me change that.
Exactly. And as well, we can show like multicultures. Wherever alcohol is used, there is the chance of a child being prenatally exposed to alcohol. So it's not just any particular culture. And I guess I'm highlighting our campaign just really quickly because we also want people to think in terms of it is not just the mother. It is the whole community around the mother, her support system, who her friends are, who her partner is. What are they doing to support a healthy, stress-free, and alcohol-free, hopefully, pregnancy? So we want people to start thinking more than it's just a woman's problem. It's up to the woman. It's her sole responsibility. She is the only reason that alcohol might be used in pregnancy. We want to step back and how are we setting her up for success? How are we setting her up for a healthy pregnancy for herself and for her child? So there are different ways of looking at it that don't have to just concentrate on a female body. Any thoughts there, Myles?
No, I think you're pretty much saying what I would say. So just understanding that, yeah, we need to look at the whole thing and also not get caught up in the, well, let's make sure it's a healthy pregnancy from day one. If it's not, we still can bring in supports. If we find out that, oh, I'm pregnant and I'm 3 months along and I've been in a softball league where we drink beer afterwards and I've had some drinks, what can I do going forward, right? It's, we're not going to be like, well, sorry, we're only working on day ones, we're not. So
exactly.
Yeah, understanding that, right? So we can still make changes and bring in supports at any time during the pregnancy.
Exactly. And when we're talking about it in that more positive way too, about, we can bring in supports, etc., we're also making it easier for someone to talk about, oh, I have used some alcohol, and not kind of go hide or never talk about it. And then once the child is born, if there are some impacts from the alcohol, never talking about the chance that there had been some alcohol use and never getting the chance to maybe find out, okay, this is what the child is experiencing, so maybe these are some things we can put in place. If it's a more open, free conversation, people will not be afraid to talk about, oh, I did use some alcohol, I wonder if. So pictures are huge. Myles.
All right. So I don't see your pictures up, Marlene. Are they?
My pictures?
Yeah. Did you have? I thought you were sharing something. Was there a picture you were sharing?
Can you see anything? Bev? What do you see?
There's a slide up, Myles, that has your very handsome face.
Right.
Faith, ability, strength.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't see it, but I will believe
you. Did you define FASD?
Yeah, so when I started working in the field of FASD, I heard a lot of things about FASD, and this was years ago, but a lot of it was negative based. And a lot of it was saying that X amount of people won't be able to live independently, have a job, they'll have addiction issues, struggles with the law, all those kind of things. And I wanted to give a realistic view of FASD, to talk about the struggles, but also a realistic view to say, okay, so when focusing on strengths, you might be able to have success in different ways, right? And so I had come up with the acronym faith, ability, strength, and determination as a way that I chose to, kind of live my life, right? And the way that I chose to see FASD, not as this big, bad, terrible doom and gloom thing that makes me a victim that suffers, rather to look at it as having a faith that there is a purpose to be here, focusing on ability, not the disability, learning where my strengths are so I can go with those, right? And then the determination that all of these things that I have to face every day, all day long, but yet I'm still getting up and facing them, right? So focusing on faith, ability, strength, and determination was a way that we could differently see FASD and in a positive way, right? So it's again changing that wording and changing what the outcome can be when we think about FASD.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes.
And, you know, those 4 words just make us all think about it differently. So I've always appreciated that definition you created. It's very smart.
It is. And I really like the determination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of strength and determination to, to persevere, especially when if you've been experiencing so many negatives in society because of the negative way society views alcohol-exposed pregnancies.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have about 7 minutes left. We did well. We did it in under an hour. So what we were going to encourage you to do is in the chat box, if you had questions, comments, observations.
Yeah, we have some resources on the next slide that we can also share with you.
There they are. These are the ones that, well, 2 of them I will be sending out, the language guide and the common messages guide. I was showing this when I'm a caregiver for a person with FASD. It's a resource guide that has some ideas from parents and kind of going through lifespan.
Feel free to type any questions you have in the chat box. And Myles, is there anything you would add today about the use of language to reduce?
I think just focusing strength-based and realistic, right? I think as an individual, I had to and still have to get to the place where I can say, I can maybe do that, but I can do it differently. And also get to the place where I maybe have to say, you know what, I can't do that. And that's okay, right? So changing that conversation to, okay, not won't and can't, instead of, looking at it and going, how about we look at it and say, what could we do different? How could we do this different? And I think a big part of that is the people around me making that change and understanding what they can do different to support me and see things differently for me, right? So being part of the conversation, people asking, what is going to work for you? What's not? Because I will know that, right? So.
Yeah, that's great. I remember traveling with you once, Myles, and snickering because I picked you up at the airport and we were leaving to go to the parking lot and I had lost the ticket, to pay in the machine. And he looks at me and says, now who has the disability? Mm-hmm. And I just think it's a great example of we all make mistakes and mess up, at times. And we are all unique individuals. We all have strengths. We all have challenges. And, your body and brain were affected by alcohol in the womb, but that doesn't mean that you aren't just as worthy as the next person and have as much to offer. So I noticed someone in the chat box said, love the change in terminology. It has been negative for too long. That is absolutely true.
Thank you.
Yeah. I remember.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Beth.
I was just going to say, I remember newspaper articles about situations where someone with FASD was, caught doing something. They were in trouble, and they were very negative. And those articles really paint a picture of negativity, and it just kind of spirals into more. And so, I know Myles been featured in the newspaper as a positive story, you know, on radio, in newspaper, and lots of talks out in the communities, and makes a great difference for that message. You know, this is a success story, and there are many other success stories.
I don't know if people had noticed, but some of the words that we've used too in today's webinar have included like the impact of alcohol instead of the damage of alcohol, and then moving, I say, to typical as opposed to normal, because really what is normal? So it's some of those little words too that can make a difference when we're talking about prenatal alcohol exposure in FASD.
Yeah. And the FASD network has also put in a comment about they've got some good resources and support for individuals with FASD through their organization.
And education and training.
Yeah, so lots of good stuff there. Douglas College in BC has tuition-free online education, some training. So there's some good stuff there. So thank you for adding those chats to our webinar. We have about a minute left. Marlene, do you want to mention the evaluation?
Yes, we will be sending an evaluation out of this webinar. I'm going to try and send it out this afternoon. Along with that, I will send copies of the resources and copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions or want further resources. I will give you our website. This webinar is not a standalone. We are also doing other webinars. So you can watch for that on the Prevention Institute Facebook feed, or I'll be sending out notices. The next webinar is going to be on sleep and children under the age of 6 with FASD or suspected FASD. We know that that can be a challenge, and we've got Dr. Anna Hanlon-Dearman from Manitoba talking about that. And then next month, we're going to talk about what is FASD. So we have a few more lined up. Myles, do you have anything lined up that you'd like to share before we sign off?
I am doing a presentation, I believe it's Ontario on Thursday, tomorrow. Is that tomorrow? That's tomorrow. But I don't know if you have it on the link there, but if not, we can share my website information when we send out the follow-up and stuff like that. Then people can check on my website on what's going on, what's coming up next, and connect with me. So, yes.
Yep. We have your website on one of the slides, www.myleshimmelreich.com, and also have your email on the last page of the presentation, so people will get that when we send it out.
Great, thank you.
Myles, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to all the participants as well.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And we have recorded this webinar, so it should be on the website in, say, a week or two. So thank you, and good afternoon, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.